What if one tank could obliterate an entire building with a single shot? The Sturmtiger did just that, but its terrifying power came with a deadly price for those who dared to operate it. Let's uncover the dark truth behind this beast of war. The Sturmtiger was one of those weapons that not only shocked the enemy, but also shocked its creators. Designed by Nazi Germany amid World War II, it was meant to be the solution to the horrors of urban combat, a place where regular tanks were helpless. Urban warfare was a nightmare for any army. Fighting through cities like Stalingrad and Warsaw taught the Germans just how deadly it could be. The enemy could hide in every corner, in buildings, and even underground. To break through, the Germans needed a weapon that could demolish everything in its path. Something that could punch through walls and fortifications, like a wrecking ball. And so, the Sturmtiger was born. Instead of using a traditional cannon, the Sturmtiger used a 380mm rocket-assisted mortar, a weapon originally designed to launch underwater bombs. The German military repurposed this weapon to target enemy strongholds, transforming the Sturmtiger into a tank capable of leveling an entire building with a single shot. It was an astonishing, almost unimaginable concept. This was a tank that carried bombs large enough to destroy whole blocks, but while its power was undeniable, so were its dangers. The Sturmtiger had a life expectancy of just a few shots in combat, and each of those shots could easily end in disaster for the crew. The Sturmtiger's design was based on the well-known Tiger I tank, which had already gained a reputation for its heavy armor and formidable presence on the battlefield. The difference, however, was in the weaponry. Rather than a traditional cannon, the Sturmtiger carried a massive 380mm mortar, firing rockets that were more like depth charges than regular artillery shells. The shells were so heavy, some weighed over 800 pounds, and their explosions could turn a building into rubble in an instant. But with such a large weapon came significant challenges. The recoil was devastating. The blast from firing the rocket mortar was so powerful that it could disorient and even blind the crew. To manage the recoil, the Sturmtiger had a specially designed venting system, but even that didn't always work perfectly. When the rockets fired, the shockwave created dust clouds and debris that would blind anyone in the tank, forcing the crew to wait until the dust settled before they could even think about firing again. And with such slow reloading times, sometimes taking up to 10 minutes to reload, the Sturmtiger was as much a target as a weapon. Once the Sturmtiger was deployed, its power quickly became apparent. The Germans hoped it would be the perfect solution for clearing out entrenched positions during urban warfare. The tank's effectiveness in combat was a double-edged sword. While it could destroy entire buildings with one hit, it was anything but easy to use. The tank's enormous weapon required careful handling, and its massive size made it a huge target. At a weight of nearly 70 tons, the Sturmtiger was slow and clunky, and getting it into the right position to fire often proved to be a battle of its own. And with the narrow streets of urban areas, maneuvering the Sturmtiger into place was often next to impossible without risking it getting stuck or exposed to enemy fire. Once in position, the tank's crew had to load the giant rocket shells by hand, using a crane to hoist each shell into place. This laborious process limited the tank's rate of fire, and in the heat of battle, the crew had little time to reload before the enemy closed in. In many cases, the Sturmtiger would fire once or twice and then become immobilized, either bogged down by its weight or destroyed by enemy fire before it could reload. The slow rate of fire, combined with the tank's awkward design, made it difficult to use effectively, and the consequences for its crew were deadly. Operating the Sturmtiger was terrifying. The crew members inside faced risks not just from enemy fire, but also from the very weapon they were using. The sheer force of firing the 380mm rockets could cause the tank to shake violently, leaving crew members disoriented and vulnerable. The weapon's blast often left a trail of dust and smoke, temporarily blinding the operators and giving the enemy a clear shot. Even when they managed to fire, they were never sure if their next shot would hit its target, or if they'd be hit first. On top of that, the Sturmtiger's crew faced psychological trauma. As the tank's primary purpose was to destroy entrenched defensive positions, crew members often witnessed the horrifying results of their firepower: buildings crumbling, people trapped inside, and the devastation that followed. These weapons didn't just cause destruction, they created scenes of pure chaos, leaving both soldiers and civilians in a state of shock. But the real horror came from the crew's vulnerability. The Sturmtiger's design offered little protection from anti-tank weapons or infantry ambushes. The thick armor could withstand some blows, but when the tank was hit, the results were catastrophic. It was a terrifying sight to see a Sturmtiger go up in flames. The crew, trapped inside a giant fireball, often had no chance to escape. The few crews that survived these encounters were left with lasting psychological scars. While the Sturmtiger was intended to be a game-changer on the Eastern Front, its true potential was never fully realized. Germany had hoped that the vehicle could serve as a decisive weapon against Soviet defenses. However, in the battle-torn landscapes of the Eastern Front, the Sturmtiger struggled. The vehicle's large size and slow movement made it vulnerable to enemy fire, and it couldn't navigate through the dense urban and rural areas as effectively as smaller tanks. The tank's heavy weight also made it prone to getting stuck in the deep mud and rubble of the battlefield. The Sturmtiger's powerful armament was often rendered ineffective in these environments. In open field combat, its slow speed and difficulty in repositioning made it an easy target for the more mobile Soviet tanks, like the T-34. Soviet forces, who had years of experience dealing with German tanks, adapted quickly to the Sturmtiger's design and its weaknesses. Soviet tank crews were well trained in ambush tactics and often used the terrain to their advantage, laying traps for German tanks, including the Sturmtiger. This left the tank at a disadvantage in the ever-shifting and unpredictable conditions of Eastern Front combat. Despite its terrifying reputation, the Sturmtiger was ultimately just one more heavy tank that lacked the flexibility to survive against the might of the Red Army. The Sturmtiger's legacy was one of terror, but also inefficiency. The idea of combining heavy artillery with the heavy armor of the Tiger tank seemed genius on paper, but in practice, it proved to be more of a symbolic weapon than a battlefield asset. The combination of an enormous 380mm rocket-powered mortar and the 68-ton Tiger chassis made the vehicle a symbol of German desperation rather than a victory bringer. Its weapon, though powerful enough to destroy buildings with one shot, was too slow and cumbersome to provide meaningful support in the fast-paced urban battles of World War II. The Sturmtiger's heavy armor made it difficult to destroy, but at the same time, its sheer weight meant it was easy to immobilize, and its limited ammunition capacity only compounded this issue. The Germans were so focused on creating massive tanks like the Sturmtiger, thinking that bigger and more powerful meant better, that they failed to consider the mobility and flexibility that made US tanks like the Sherman so effective. While the Germans created terrifying machines of war, the Americans knew that speed and adaptability often won the battle, not just raw power. By the time the Sturmtiger saw combat, Germany was already fighting a losing war. The tank, though incredibly powerful, was simply too cumbersome and inefficient for the fast-moving battles of the later years. With only 18 units ever built, the Sturmtiger's impact on the battlefield was limited. It was a weapon of terror and destruction, but it arrived too late in the war to make a difference. As the Allies pushed further into German territory, the Sturmtiger was used less and less. One of the few times the Sturmtiger was put to full use was during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, but even here, its cumbersome design hindered its effectiveness. In the dense forests and snow-covered terrain, the Sturmtiger struggled to find targets that suited its enormous weapon. Many of the tanks broke down or ran out of fuel and had to be abandoned by their crews. In the final days of the war, the Sturmtiger was relegated to a defensive role, with its crews ordered to destroy whatever targets they could before the inevitable German surrender. The tank's once feared power became a hollow symbol of the Reich's desperation.